Hi everyone, welcome back to English with Emma. In this video we're going to look at the second conditional. We'll talk about the structure and when we use the second conditional, and we'll also look at wish and if only, and then at the end of the video we'll talk about inversion. So this video is good for anyone from B1 level, so that's intermediate, B2 upper intermediate, and also C1 advanced level. I hope that you find this video useful, and if you do, please give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more, then why not subscribe to the channel? It's free. Let's get started. So let's look at the structure of the second conditional. We have the if clause, where we use if plus the past simple, and then the main clause, where we have would or would not if it's negative, plus the infinitive of the verb. If I won the lottery, I would buy a sports car. Now we can reverse it and start with the main clause, would or would not plus infinitive, and then the if clause, if plus the past simple. I would buy a sports car if I won the lottery. Now the meaning is exactly the same. The only thing that changes is that if you start with the main clause, you don't need to use the comma before if. So if you start with the if clause, you must use a comma. If I won the lottery, comma, I would buy a sports car. And if you start with the main clause, there's no comma. Now you don't have to use would, you could also use might or could. So what's the difference? Well, would indicates that we're certain about something. Might indicates that we are not certain. And could indicates possibility. Let's see an example. If I had £1 million, I would travel the world 100%. I would definitely do this action. I might buy a boat 50-50, I'm not sure, maybe. And I could help a lot of people. It would be possible for me to help a lot of people. Now, the verb to be in the second conditional. Normally, we would say we, you, or they were. I, he, she, or it was. Now, in the second conditional, for I, he, she, and it, we can also use were, and it's more formal. So in the second conditional, only in the second conditional, you can use were as the past tense of the verb to be for all subjects. We were, you were, they were, I were, he were, she were, and it were. Let's look at contracted forms in the main clause. So we've got I would can be contracted to I'd. And on the right here, this is the phonetic transcription, just shows you how the word is pronounced. So, I'd. We would, we'd. You would, you'd. They would, they'd. He would, he'd. She would, she'd. It would, it'd. And if you're using a negative, would not can be contracted to wouldn't. So I wouldn't, we wouldn't, you wouldn't, they wouldn't, he wouldn't, she wouldn't, and it wouldn't. So when do we use the second conditional? Well, to talk about an unreal present or future. They're unreal because they're either very unlikely, imaginary, hypothetical, or impossible. It's not expected that the condition will be fulfilled. So Let's talk about the unreal present first of all, and you can see the structure along the top. So the real situation, I don't have a pet, but I can imagine an unreal situation. If I had a pet, I would have a cat. So we use the past simple here. Had, if I had a pet, I would have a cat. And this is me just imagining an unreal present. Let's have another one. I am not cold now. This is the real situation. So I can imagine a different situation. If I were cold, I would put on a jacket. So we change the verb from am to were. And notice how I've used were here. I could say, if I was cold, I would put on a jacket. But if I were cold, I would put on a jacket. In the second conditional, I prefer to use were all the time. It's just easier, and to me it sounds more natural. Let's have another one. I can't speak every language, unfortunately. And I can imagine if I could speak every language, I could communicate with so many people. And notice here we've got could instead of would. So it would be possible for me to communicate with so many people. They live in a flat. This is the reality. Let's look at an imaginary situation. If they lived in a house, they might have more space. And here we have might, because I'm not sure. Some flats are very big, some houses are very small. So maybe they would have more space. Now let's talk about the unreal future. So the real situation, I probably won't find a suitcase full of money, unfortunately. And I can imagine a future where I would find a suitcase full of money. So if I found a suitcase full of money, and notice we change the verb, find, we use the past simple, found. If I found a suitcase full of money, I would take it to the police station. So this is me imagining a future where I find a suitcase full of money, which very probably will not happen. The reality, aliens probably won't land on Earth. But I can imagine if aliens landed on Earth, I would be very nervous. In reality, I probably won't meet my favorite band. But I can imagine if I met my favorite band, I would tell them how much I love their music. I probably won't go on holiday this summer. It's not likely. I had a big holiday last summer, so this year I have to save money. So I can imagine, though, if I went on holiday this summer, I would go to Greece. So we also use the second conditional to give advice. And when we give advice, we use if I were you. Now, in this situation, when you give advice, you cannot use was. This is a fixed expression, if I were you. So if I was you is not correct. So we have a problem. Somebody tells me, imagine your friend is telling you, I'm tired all the time, and you want to give them some advice. If I were you, I'd go to bed earlier. Another problem, I need to lose weight. And some advice, if I were you, I'd eat less chocolate. Problem, I'm nervous about my exam. Advice, if I were you, I'd try meditation. Another problem, I don't know how to cook. Some advice, if I were you, I'd watch some YouTube tutorials. Now, something to bear in mind about advice. Advice is an uncountable noun. You can't say one advice, two advices. So if you want to talk about one, you have to say a piece of advice, or more than one, or in general, some advice. Can you give me some advice, please? Or can you give me a piece of advice? We also use the second conditional to ask questions about hypothetical situations. What would you do if? So here we have the structure. If, past simple, and then a question word, not in every case, but if it's appropriate, and then would or wouldn't, and the infinitive. If you were invisible, what would you do? Now, it's more usual, really, to start with the main clause. So we'd have a question word, and then would or wouldn't, an infinitive, and then the if clause second. What would you do if? And then we can finish the question in many different ways. What would you do if you were invisible? What would you do if you had £1 million? What would you do if you were the Prime Minister? What would you do if you were me? Imagine you have a problem and you want some advice. You might ask your friend, what would you do if you were me? What would you do if you could do anything? And the question word doesn't have to be what. Say, where would you go if you could go anywhere? Where would you go if you didn't have to work today? How would you feel if you were in that situation? How would you feel if you didn't have any free time? Would you buy a boat if you won the lottery? So here there's no question word because we don't need it. We just want to know yes or no. Would you buy a boat if you won the lottery? Yes, I would. Or no, I wouldn't. Would you go into space if you could? No, definitely not. I'm too scared to go into space. So we can also use what if or supposing to ask questions about hypothetical situations. Now, if we use what if or supposing, then we don't use if. We replace if with what if or supposing, and then the past simple. And usually this is a standalone question, and you would follow it up with another question for more information. So let's see some examples. What if, or supposing, what if you could travel through time? What would you do? Or supposing you could travel through time, where would you go? How would you feel? Would you do it? Or you could just say, would you? We also use the second conditional for tentative polite requests. So here we would start with the main clause, would, followed by infinitive, and then if and the past simple. I would be grateful if you told me your arrival time. Or you could say, I would be grateful if you could tell me your arrival time. Now, it's very natural in this polite request situation to say, if you could, and then the infinitive. And here, although we are making a request, grammatically, it's not a request, it's a statement. So you don't use a question mark. There is no question mark here. I would appreciate it if you worked late. Or I would appreciate it if you could work late. It would be really helpful if you tidied the living room. It would be really helpful if you could tidy the living room. It would be great if you took care of the kids tonight. It would be great if you could take care of the kids tonight. We also use a second conditional structure to express dissatisfaction with the present. And we can use wish or if only. So here we use wish or if only plus the past simple. And often these are standalone phrases, so you don't always have a main clause. So we have a real situation. I don't have much money. Now, I'm not very happy with this situation, so I would say an unreal situation I'm imagining. If only I had more money. Now, when we use wish or if only, we feel quite strongly about things, so you would emphasize. You wouldn't say, if only I had more money. You would say, if only I had more money. Reality, I'm so tired. And I wish I wasn't so tired. So we're imagining a different present reality because we are dissatisfied or unhappy with the real or true situation. Reality, it's always cloudy here. If only I lived somewhere sunny. Or I wish I lived somewhere sunny. Reality, I have to work tomorrow. But I can imagine the situation. I wish I didn't have to work tomorrow. Or only I didn't have to work tomorrow. Now, let's talk about inversion in the second conditional. If you are studying for an exam, C1 exam, for example, then you will need to know about inversion. It's a more formal form of the conditional, and there are two ways you can do it. The first is with the verb to be, to describe an unreal present state. So let's see some examples of inversion for the unreal present using the verb to be. So in a normal conditional if clause, we have if plus the subject and then was or were or not if it's negative. Now for inversion, we remove if and we invert the verb to be and the subject. So instead of I was or I were, you would say were I or were I not if it's negative. Now in inversion, we don't use was because inversion is a formal structure and was would be less formal. So stick to were. If I were you, I would leave now. This is a normal second conditional structure. But we can use inversion and say, were I you, I would leave now. So we remove if and I were becomes were I. And the main clause does not change. I would leave now. And I would leave now. There's no change in the main clause. If I weren't so busy, I would go to the beach. Were I not so busy, I would go to the beach. So again, we take out if and I were not becomes were I not. If you were older, you would have more experience. Were you older, you would have more experience. Remove if and you were becomes were you. If they weren't so stubborn, they would change their plans. Were they not so stubborn, they would change their plans. If is gone and they were not becomes were they not. Now, The second way that we can use inversion in the second conditional is with other verbs, and if we use verbs that are not the verb to be, we are describing an unreal future. So the unreal future with inversion. So the normal second conditional if clause, if plus the subject and then the past simple. With inversion, were plus the subject, not if it's negative, and then to and infinitive. And again, don't use was, because we're in a formal structure here, and was would be informal. If the government solved all our problems, they would be extremely popular. So there's a normal second conditional phrase here. Now let's invert it. Were the government to solve all our problems, they would be extremely popular. So if is gone, and we start with were, and then the subject, and instead of the past simple, we have to and infinitive. So if the government solved becomes were the government to solve. Yeah, so replace if with were and change the past simple to and infinitive. If I saw a ghost, I would run away. Were I to see a ghost, I would run away. So again, change if to were and past simple saw to and infinitive, to see. If I saw a pink elephant, I would be very surprised. Were I to see a pink elephant, I would be very surprised. So if changes to were and past simple becomes to and infinitive. If I saw, were I to see. If I met a talking cat, I would ask it what its name was. So if becomes were and met becomes to meet. Were I to meet a talking cat, I would ask it what its name was. So there you go. That is everything you need to know about the second conditional. Thanks for watching, guys. And if you did find the video useful, then please give it a like. And if you'd like to see more, then why not subscribe to the channel? That's all for now, so I'll see you next time. Have a great day. Bye.